The scream that tore through the Virginia countryside on March 15, 1847, was a sound unlike any the residents of Cumberland County had ever heard before. It wasn't the raw cry of an animal being slaughtered, nor the mournful wail of a woman in the agony of childbirth. It was something far more primal, far more disturbing. According to sealed court documents, discovered only decades later in a dusty, forgotten corner of the courthouse archive, 13 members of the Peyton family were found dismembered in their sprawling plantation home, their remains arranged with a surgical precision that utterly baffled investigators. The local sheriff's report, buried for over a century, described cuts so clean and methodical that they appeared to be the work of someone with an intimate, chilling knowledge of human anatomy. What makes this case even more terrifying is that the prime suspect, a slave known only as Isaac, had vanished without a single trace, leaving behind evidence that would make even the most seasoned, hardened lawmen question everything they thought they knew about the peculiar institution of slavery. Before we continue with the story of Isaac and the blood-soaked secrets of the Peyton plantation, if you're fascinated by these dark chapters of American history that were deliberately hidden from the textbooks, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We uncover the most disturbing secrets buried deep in our nation's past. Also, let me know in the comments what state you're listening from. I'm always curious to see how far these forgotten, terrifying stories reach. The events that transpired at Peyton Grove would forever change how authorities in antebellum Virginia viewed the complex, fraught relationship between master and slave, though the full truth of what happened that March evening would remain locked away in courthouse vaults until long after the Civil War had rent the nation in two. Cumberland County, Virginia, in the spring of 1847, was a land of deep and troubling contradictions. Rolling hills covered in a vibrant patchwork of tobacco stretched as far as the eye could see, a deceptive beauty that spoke to the region's immense prosperity. The James River meandered through the countryside, a silver ribbon providing both transportation and the lifeblood for the grand plantations that dotted its banks. It was a place where a genteel society flourished on the backs of enslaved labor, where wealthy plantation owners gathered for elaborate dinners while their human property toiled in the fields from the first light of dawn to the last rays of sunset. Peyton Grove sat on nearly 2,000 acres of prime Virginia soil, about 15 miles southwest of the county seat of Cumberland Courthouse. The plantation had been in the Peyton family for 3 generations, built by Josiah Peyton in the 1760s using wealth accumulated through tobacco cultivation and what locals euphemistically called agricultural investments. The main house, an imposing 3-story structure with stately white columns and wraparound porches, commanded a view of the entire property from its position atop a gentle rise. By 1847, the plantation was under the management of Cornelius Peyton, Josiah's grandson, a man known throughout the county for his sharp business acumen and his particular, almost scientific approach to managing enslaved workers. Unlike some of his neighbors who relied on overseers, Cornelius prided himself on maintaining direct, absolute control over every aspect of plantation life. He was a man of medium height with penetrating gray eyes and prematurely silver hair that he kept meticulously groomed. His wife, Margaret, was the daughter of a prominent Richmond banking family, and together they had 4 children: Samuel, aged 22, Elizabeth, 19, Thomas, 16, and young Mary, just 12 years old. The Peyton household also included Cornelius's elderly mother, Prudence, who at 78 still maintained a strict oversight of the domestic arrangements, and Margaret's unmarried sister, Catherine, who had come to live with the family after their father's death the previous year. The extended family was completed by Cornelius's younger brother, Dr. Jonathan Peyton, a physician who had studied in Philadelphia before returning to Virginia to establish his practice. Jonathan frequently stayed at the plantation when treating patients in the rural areas of the county. What set the Peyton plantation apart from others in the region was not just its size or productivity, but the unusual background of its workforce. Cornelius had inherited 43 enslaved individuals, but over the years he had acquired several others under circumstances that raised eyebrows among his peers. Unlike most slaveholders who purchased their labor from established markets in Richmond or Norfolk, Cornelius had a peculiar habit of acquiring individuals whom other owners had deemed problematic or unmanageable. It was through this practice that Isaac came to Peyton Grove in the autumn of 1844. The man, who would later be known throughout Virginia by a far more sinister name, had originally belonged to a plantation in neighboring Prince Edward County, where he had worked in the slaughterhouse. His previous owner, a man named Fielding Crawford, had been desperate to sell Isaac after what he described in correspondence as incidents of an increasingly disturbing nature. Isaac was a man of imposing physical presence, standing well over 6 feet tall, with broad, powerful shoulders and hands that seemed disproportionately large even for his massive frame. His most striking feature was his eyes, a pale, flat gray that seemed almost colorless in certain light, giving him an unsettling, predatory gaze that made even hardened overseers deeply uncomfortable. He spoke little, preferring to communicate through curt nods and gestures, though those who worked alongside him noted that his silence wasn't born of ignorance, but of careful, unnerving observation. What made Isaac particularly valuable to plantation owners was his exceptional, almost supernatural skill with a blade. He could dress a hog in half the time it took most men, his knife work so precise that he wasted virtually no meat in the process. His knowledge of anatomy was encyclopedic. He knew exactly where to cut to separate joints, how to remove organs without puncturing them, and how to preserve meat for long-term storage. These skills had made him indispensable at his previous plantation, despite the growing, palpable unease his presence seemed to generate among both enslaved and free residents. The incidents that had prompted Crawford to sell Isaac were never fully documented in official records, but whispered accounts spoke of livestock found butchered with an unnecessary, almost artistic brutality, their remains arranged in bizarre, ritualistic ways that served no practical purpose. There were also rumors of Isaac being found standing over freshly slaughtered animals long after his work should have been completed, his clothes mysteriously spotless despite the nature of his labor, as if he had found ways to perform his duties without getting a single drop of blood on himself. When Cornelius Peyton acquired Isaac in 1844, he believed he was getting a bargain, a highly skilled laborer at a fraction of the usual cost. Crawford had been so eager to complete the sale that he accepted nearly 30% less than Isaac's assessed value, requiring only that Peyton promise never to sell Isaac back to any plantation in Prince Edward County. For nearly 3 years, Isaac worked at Peyton Grove without incident. He was assigned to manage the plantation's meat production, overseeing the slaughter of livestock and the preservation of meat for both the family's consumption and sale to neighboring properties. He worked alone, by his own preference, in a building that had been constructed specifically for this purpose about 200 yards from the main house. The slaughterhouse was a sturdy brick structure with thick walls and few windows, designed to keep the interior cool even during Virginia's oppressive summers. Inside, Isaac had arranged his tools with military precision, knives of every size and shape hanging from wooden pegs, sharpening stones positioned at exact intervals, and a collection of heavy cleavers that he maintained with obsessive, almost loving care. The building was always immaculately clean, despite the nature of the work performed there, leading some to wonder how Isaac managed to complete his bloody tasks without leaving the usual signs of his profession. The morning of March 15, 1847, began like any other at Peyton Grove. The early spring air carried the scent of tobacco seedlings and the promise of another profitable growing season. Margaret Peyton was in the kitchen garden, directing the preparation of beds for vegetables that would feed the plantation's inhabitants through the coming months. The children were at their lessons with their tutor, Professor Aldrich, who came from Richmond twice weekly to ensure they received an education befitting their social station. Cornelius had spent the morning in his study, reviewing accounts and correspondence with factors in Richmond regarding the upcoming tobacco auction. The numbers were encouraging. The previous year's crop had commanded premium prices, and early indicators suggested this year would be even better. By his calculations, the plantation was positioned to generate more profit in 1847 than in any previous year in its history. It was Dr. Jonathan Peyton who first noticed that something was terribly amiss. He had arrived at the plantation the previous evening to treat several enslaved workers who had developed symptoms of what appeared to be influenza. As was his custom, he had planned to examine the patients again before departing for his next calls. However, when he approached the quarters shortly after noon, he found them eerily, unnaturally quiet. The doctor's first instinct was that the patients were resting, recovering from their illness under the care of old Bessie, the plantation's designated healer. But as he drew closer to the small wooden structures that housed the enslaved population, he became aware of an unusual odor. Not the typical smells of wood smoke and cooking associated with the quarters, but something sharper, more metallic. It was then that he noticed the door to Isaac's cabin standing open, swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze. This was highly unusual, as Isaac was known for his fierce preference for privacy and typically kept his door closed even during the warmest weather. More disturbing was what appeared to be dark, rust-colored stains on the wooden threshold. Stains that looked disturbingly similar to dried blood. Dr. Peyton approached the cabin with a growing, cold apprehension. His medical training had exposed him to blood in many forms, and he recognized the distinctive color and pattern of these stains. They weren't the result of a minor injury or the usual accidents that occurred during manual labor. These stains suggested something far more serious had occurred. Pushing the door fully open, the doctor peered into the cabin's dim interior. What he saw defied immediate comprehension. The usually Spartan room had been transformed into something resembling a macabre exhibition. Isaac's few personal possessions had been arranged with geometric precision, but it was what hung from the cabin's rafters that caused Dr. Peyton to stumble backward in abject horror. Suspended from ropes that appeared to have been measured and cut with mathematical precision were what initially appeared to be sides of pork or beef. But as the doctor's eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the cabin's single window, he realized with a growing, nauseating revulsion that these were not animal remains. The cuts were too precise, too deliberate, and the proportions were unmistakably, terrifyingly human. Dr. Peyton's hands shook uncontrollably as he backed away from the cabin, his medical training warring with his primal instinct to flee. He had seen death in many forms during his practice, but nothing had prepared him for the cold, clinical precision with which these remains had been prepared. Each cut appeared to have been made with surgical accuracy, separating joints at exactly the right points, removing organs with a skill that spoke to extensive, expert anatomical knowledge. What disturbed him most was not just the presence of human remains, but their pristine condition. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of violence in the usual sense. The cuts were clean, methodical, suggesting that whoever had performed this work had taken considerable time and care. It was as if someone had approached the human body with the same professional detachment they might show when butchering livestock for market. The doctor's legs barely carried him back toward the main house, his mind struggling to process the grotesque tableau he had witnessed. As he stumbled across the plantation grounds, he became aware of other disturbing details he had initially missed. The usual sounds of plantation life, the lifeblood of the estate, were absent. No voices calling from the fields, no children playing around the quarters, no cooking fires sending smoke curling into the afternoon sky. The world had gone silent. When Dr. Peyton reached the main house, he found the front door standing ajar, another detail that struck him as profoundly wrong. Margaret Peyton was meticulous about security and would never have left the house unsecured during the day. Calling out for his brother, a tremor in his voice, the doctor received no response. The house, like the quarters, was unnaturally, deathly quiet. Moving through the ground floor rooms, Dr. Peyton found signs of normal daily life abruptly, violently interrupted. In the dining room, the table was set for the midday meal, but the food remained untouched, congealing on fine china plates that bore the Peyton family crest. In the parlor, Margaret's needlework lay abandoned on her favorite chair, the needle still trailing a length of blue silk thread. It was when he reached the foot of the main staircase that Dr. Peyton made the discovery that would haunt him for the remainder of his life. Dark stains, similar to those he had observed at Isaac's cabin, traced a path up the carpeted stairs, creating a sickening pattern that suggested something heavy had been dragged from the upper floors. The scene that greeted Dr. Jonathan Peyton in the upper floors of the Peyton mansion would be burned into his memory forever, a series of waking nightmares from which he would never truly escape. In what had once been Cornelius's private study, a room of leather and dark wood, the doctor found his brother's body arranged in a manner that defied all understanding of human behavior. Cornelius sat in his high-backed leather chair behind his mahogany desk, his hands positioned as if he had been in the middle of writing in his ledger. But his head had been removed with surgical precision and placed on the desktop, facing the door like some grotesque, welcoming paperweight. The clinical, almost theatrical nature of the arrangement was what disturbed Dr. Peyton most profoundly. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture or scattered papers. The room appeared exactly as it would have on any normal day, except for the impossible, horrifying presence of his brother's severed head, positioned with careful, deliberate attention to detail. Even more unsettling, Cornelius's body showed no signs of the violent struggle such an act should have required. Moving through the house in a state approaching clinical shock, the doctor discovered that every member of the Peyton household had met a similar, artistically gruesome fate. Margaret was found in the master bedroom, positioned as if she had been arranging flowers in a vase on the dressing table. Her body remained upright, but her head had been removed and placed carefully among the blooms she had been arranging, creating a tableau that was both artistic and utterly horrifying. The children had been discovered in the nursery, arranged as if they were playing a game. Samuel, Elizabeth, Thomas, and young Mary sat in a perfect circle on the floor, their bodies positioned naturally, but each had been decapitated with the same impossible surgical precision. Their heads had been placed in the center of their circle, facing inward, as if they were engaged in a silent, eternal conversation. Old Prudence was found in her rocking chair on the back porch, positioned as if she were watching the sunset, her severed head placed on a small table beside her chair, next to her Bible and reading spectacles. Catherine was discovered in the kitchen, apparently in the midst of preparing bread, her head placed on the wooden cutting board where she had been working. What made the scene even more disturbing was the complete, unnatural absence of blood throughout the house. Despite the obvious, extreme violence that had occurred, there were no spatters on the walls, no pools on the floors, no signs of the carnage such acts should have produced. It was as if each person had been killed elsewhere and then carefully, meticulously positioned in these domestic tableaus. Dr. Peyton's medical training allowed him to observe details that others might have missed. The cuts on each body were identical in their precision, made by someone with extensive, expert knowledge of human anatomy. The edges of the wounds were clean, suggesting extremely sharp instruments wielded by unerringly steady hands. Most disturbing of all, there were no defensive wounds on any of the victims. No signs that they had attempted to fight off their attacker. The doctor's examination of the bodies revealed another chilling detail. Each victim appeared to have been killed by a single precise cut to the neck, made from behind with surgical accuracy. The positioning of the wound suggested that the victims had been completely unaware of their attacker's approach, killed so quickly that they had no opportunity to react or defend themselves. When Cumberland County Sheriff Thomas Hawthorne arrived at Peyton Grove the following morning, summoned by Dr. Peyton's frantic, desperate midnight ride to the courthouse, he brought with him 2 deputies and the county coroner. What they found challenged every assumption about criminal behavior that their combined experience had provided. Sheriff Hawthorne was a man of considerable experience in dealing with violence on the Virginia frontier. He had investigated murders committed in passion, robberies that had turned deadly, and even the occasional slave uprising that had been violently, brutally suppressed. But the scene at Peyton Grove was unlike anything in his 20 years of law enforcement. The sheriff's initial focus was on determining how one person could have killed 13 individuals without any of them raising an alarm or attempting to escape. The house showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the killer had been admitted willingly or had possessed keys to the property. More puzzling was the question of how the bodies had been moved and positioned without leaving the blood trails that such activity should have generated. Coroner William Fitzgerald's preliminary examination of the bodies confirmed Dr. Peyton's observations about the precision of the wounds. The professor's inquiries in Prince Edward County revealed additional mysteries. Dr. Samuel Hutchinson, a physician who had treated enslaved workers on Crawford's plantation, remembered Isaac well, but for reasons that added new, horrifying layers to the mystery. According to Hutchinson, Isaac had possessed medical knowledge that exceeded that of many trained physicians, particularly in the areas of anatomy and surgical technique. Hutchinson recalled occasions when Isaac had been called upon to assist with medical emergencies involving both human and animal patients. His skill with a knife was so exceptional that Hutchinson had wondered whether Isaac might have received training from a qualified physician, though such an education would have been highly unusual. The doctor's memories of Isaac also included disturbing details about his behavior. Unlike other assistants who showed appropriate emotional responses to suffering, Isaac had remained completely detached, observing procedures with a cold, clinical interest rather than human empathy. Hutchinson had found Isaac's presence increasingly unsettling, though he admitted his assistance had been invaluable. The investigation also revealed that Isaac's departure from Crawford's plantation had been more urgent than initially described. Local records showed that 3 enslaved individuals had died under mysterious circumstances in the months preceding Isaac's sale. While the deaths had been attributed to illness, Dr. Hutchinson's private notes suggested he had harbored suspicions. The 3 individuals had been found in their quarters, apparently having died peacefully. However, Hutchinson's examination had revealed that each had sustained a small, precise puncture wound behind the left ear. The doctor noted such wounds could have been made by a thin, sharp instrument inserted with surgical precision to damage the brainstem and cause instant, silent death. Hutchinson's notes indicated he had shared his suspicions with Crawford, but the plantation owner had been reluctant to pursue an investigation. Instead, Crawford had quietly arranged to sell Isaac to the first buyer who inquired. Sheriff Hawthorne's investigation expanded, revealing a man who had moved through Virginia's plantation system like a predator. Records from Chesterfield County showed a plantation owner named Benjamin Carruthers had briefly owned Isaac in 1843 before selling him to Crawford. Under pressure, Carruthers admitted that several of his most valuable workers had died during Isaac's tenure, each discovered with a small, nearly invisible wound behind the left ear. Carruthers revealed he had begun to suspect Isaac after observing his behavior around the bodies of the deceased. While others had shown grief, Isaac had displayed a clinical interest, examining the corpses with the detachment of a medical professional. The owner's suspicions were confirmed when he discovered Isaac late one night, standing over the body of a recently deceased woman holding a thin, pointed instrument. When confronted, Isaac had calmly explained that he was studying the effects of death on human tissue, a response so disturbing that Carruthers had arranged his sale within days. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Cumberland County intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in this tale of calculated terror. The breakthrough in the Isaac investigation came from an unexpected and profoundly disturbing source. Father O'Sullivan, an Irish priest who served the scattered Catholic families throughout Cumberland and its surrounding counties. He approached Sheriff Hawthorne with information that would finally explain both Isaac's whereabouts and the true, terrifying scope of his activities. Father O'Sullivan had been conducting his monthly circuit when he encountered a group of travelers on the road. 3 men and 1 woman, dressed as itinerant preachers, but behaving in ways that aroused his deepest suspicions. Their leader, a tall man with unervingly pale eyes, had insisted on discussing theological questions related to death and resurrection. The conversation, according to the priest, had focused obsessively on the physical aspects of death and the condition of the human body after the soul's departure. The man demonstrated an anatomical knowledge that exceeded anything the priest had encountered outside of medical schools, but his interest seemed more artistic than scientific. What truly alarmed Father O'Sullivan was the man's description of recent religious experiences. He spoke of receiving divine inspiration to help others transcend the limitations of mortal flesh, and described visions in which he had been instructed to create living sculptures using human bodies. The man claimed that through his work, he was helping souls achieve a more perfect union with their Creator. The priest's description of the group's leader was a perfect match for Isaac. More importantly, Father O'Sullivan had observed the group traveling toward Powhatan County, where they claimed to be planning a great revival meeting to demonstrate their unique approach to spiritual enlightenment. Sheriff Hawthorne immediately dispatched riders to alert his counterpart in Powhatan County and began organizing a pursuit party. However, before they could depart, they received word that their destination had already been determined. A plantation owner named Colonel William Randolph had sent an urgent message requesting immediate assistance with what he described as the most horrific crime ever perpetrated in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The scene that greeted law enforcement at the Randolph plantation exceeded even the horrors of Peyton Grove. The colonial-era mansion had been transformed into a gallery of human death. In the main parlor, 17 members of the household had been arranged in an elaborate tableau depicting a formal dinner party. Each victim was seated around the massive mahogany dining table, their severed heads placed on china plates before them. The arrangement was designed to create the illusion that the family was sharing a meal together, even in death. Candles had been lit, casting flickering shadows that gave the macabre scene an almost festive atmosphere. But it was in the mansion's ballroom that investigators discovered the true extent of Isaac's artistic vision. The bodies of 32 enslaved individuals had been arranged in dancing poses, their heads replaced with the heads of various family members, creating the impression of an integrated social gathering that would have been impossible in life. The precision required to create such a scene spoke to days of methodical work. Dr. Peyton, accompanying the team, found evidence that Isaac had been assisted by at least 3 others, confirming the priest's account. Hidden in the plantation's root cellar, investigators discovered Isaac's field laboratory. The chamber had been converted into a surgical suite, complete with medical instruments, anatomical charts, and notes describing experimental procedures. Most disturbing were sketches showing planned arrangements for future victims. The lab contained evidence that Isaac had been conducting anatomical studies on living subjects before killing them. Restraining devices, built with a carpenter's precision, were designed to hold victims immobile while Isaac performed procedures that had no purpose beyond satisfying his curiosity about human pain responses and the mechanics of death. The notes revealed he was documenting the effects of various injuries, trying to determine the optimal methods for prolonging a victim's awareness during the dying process. The investigation took its most crucial turn when Sheriff Hawthorne discovered Isaac and his disciples had not yet completed their work. Fresh surgical instruments showed no signs of use, and detailed maps of neighboring plantations had been found, annotated with surveillance notes. The maps revealed Isaac had studied at least 6 additional properties. Most alarming was a detailed timeline showing planned attacks extending through the summer of 1847. Isaac envisioned a campaign of terror, with each massacre serving as a chapter in what he called his treatise on the aesthetics of mortality. The timeline indicated his next target was the Carrington Plantation in Cumberland County, less than 10 miles away. The attack was scheduled for the following evening, timed to coincide with a dinner party that would place the maximum number of victims in a single location. Sheriff Hawthorne immediately dispatched riders to warn the Carrington family while organizing the largest manhunt in Virginia's history. Law enforcement from 5 counties converged on the area, determined to intercept Isaac before he could claim more victims. As evening approached on the night of the planned attack, there was still no trace of the fugitives. The decision was made to use the Carrington Plantation as bait, positioning armed officers throughout the property while allowing the dinner party to proceed under heavy but concealed security. The attack came not from the direction anyone anticipated. Isaac and his disciples had spent days tunneling beneath the plantation, creating an underground network that allowed them to emerge inside the house. The first indication of wrong came when a guest commented on a scratching sound beneath the dining room floor. Before anyone could react, sections of the flooring gave way, and 4 figures erupted from below with the sudden violence of predators. The standoff lasted for nearly 2 hours. Isaac, his expression one of religious ecstasy, engaged his captives in philosophical discussions about death, treating the terror of the living as just another component in his artistic vision. He explained his techniques for preserving the appearance of life after death, his disciples nodding in full-throated agreement. The breakthrough came when Colonel Carrington, a military veteran, managed to signal the concealed officers. The assault was swift and decisive. Windows exploded inward as officers breached the dining room from 3 directions. Isaac, caught mid-sentence, was struck by multiple rifle balls. His 3 disciples were neutralized within seconds. Isaac's death ended the immediate threat, but the investigation continued for months, revealing evidence linking him to over 100 deaths across 6 counties. His correspondence showed a network of disciples extending across the southeastern United States. The official report, sealed for decades, concluded that Isaac's true identity remained a mystery. Samuel Woodson's account from Philadelphia could never be verified. The report speculated he might have been an educated free man who deliberately entered the slave system to gain access to victims, or even a white man passing as enslaved. The true horror of Isaac's story lay not in the supernatural, but in the calculated application of human intelligence to the pursuit of pure evil. His crimes demonstrated that the capacity for systematic violence existed within the normal parameters of human behavior, requiring only the right combination of opportunity, skill, and a twisted motivation to manifest in devastating ways. This mystery shows us how easily evil can hide behind the facade of normalcy, and how systems of oppression can provide cover for the most heinous crimes. The meticulous planning of Isaac's campaign reminds us that the greatest monsters are often those who appear most rational and controlled. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about Isaac's true identity and motives? Leave your comment below and let me know which historical mysteries from your area you'd like us to investigate next. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. The darkest chapters of American history are often the ones that were deliberately hidden. And together, we'll continue uncovering the secrets that powerful people tried to bury forever. See you in the next video.